So he saw me play, represent my country. And he died on Sunday night. If I ended up going all the way through the training system and I ended up going flying fast jets, I was half prepared for my career to be curtailed in rugby. You know, my job was flying, being in the Air Force, and my hobby was playing rugby. That's the best way to describe it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lights, Camera, Combat podcast. The podcast where we speak to incredible people with inspirational stories from a life in connection to combat and shine a light on it. Over the course of this series, I'm sitting down with veterans turned TV presenters, world record holders and even World War II veterans to help me, and hopefully you, find the light at the end of any tunnel. Now, keen-eyed viewers amongst you might have noticed that there wasn't a video on the channel last week. Well, that's because over the next couple of weeks there'll be so much content coming your way, so many videos getting ready to be released, and it is starting today with the first part of an incredible conversation with England record try scorer Rory Underwood. Rory spent the entirety of his rugby career also being a pilot in the RAF. He went on to make 85 caps for England, scoring 49 tries, a record which still stands today, and at the time the 85 caps made him England's all-time record cap holder as well. On this episode we'll be starting at the beginning of Rory's life, going from childhood, early grief, from following that dream to becoming an RAF pilot, as well as starting to integrate the rugby into that. Now, the reason there was no episode last week on the YouTube channel is because tomorrow we will be dropping the next part of this episode. This is so that we've got a double episode week, so you get back-to-back part 1 and 2 in the same week with Rory Underwood. This is preparing for VE Day next week, where we will also be dropping a double video week with the documentary and a special podcast episode. If you haven't heard about the documentary yet, go back to check out our Update Halfway episode and you can find out more about that. But for now, let's dive in with Rory Underwood. So, wherever you are, however you listen, sit back and enjoy this episode of Lights, Camera, Combat. RAF veteran, rugby legend and sporting icon, Rory Underwood, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. First and foremost, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating. We've had a pre-chat, we chatted earlier on, whatever. RAF veteran. It's really fascinating because I know the work you've done before with your documentary with the 99-year-old veteran. You know, when I was your age, because I joined the Air Force when I was 20. When I was going through, I remember veterans coming through, visiting the camp when we were flying training or whatever. Somebody used to be on a previous, and these guys were like in their 60s or 70s. This is like 20, 30 years ago,
yeah.
And they'd be in their blazers and they'd have wall-to-wall medals on them. And you start talking to them, and they're like rear gunners, under fuselage gunners. This sort of stuff in a Lancaster bomber, spending 11 hours flying across to Germany and back. They were veterans to me.
Yeah.
When I think about veterans, and I did 18 years in the Air Force and I never actually saw action. And it's one of those things that I do feel a little bit uncomfortable when I talk. I consider myself a veteran. I do, because I never saw action. Technically I am a veteran, but it's something in my mind that whenever I think about my time, because when I joined the Air Force in '83, the World War was only just under 40 years before I joined. So there were lots of people that were, involved in the World War that, can call themselves veterans across the services for obvious reasons.
So just jumping on that really quickly before we really get into it then. So do you define veteran more then as a soldier who has seen action?
I don't define it that way. I'm just conscious in my own mind that
not being comparable to somebody who might have.
The biggest challenge you find in a lot of people that are ex-military is because we've been brought up to be self-sufficient, you know, in charge of your own destiny, working as teams or whatever. There's always this sense that if people get in hard times or ex-military, and somebody comes to offer them help, they say, "Oh no, just there's somebody else that's probably more in need than I am." I'm an ambassador for the RAF Association, and it's one of the things I hear a lot whenever I go into our meetings and stuff is that people, who are struggling with payment, who've, problems with their spouses, and they're having problems, and in any normal circumstance, everybody would say, "No, you need help," but they're going, "I'm sure there's somebody else worse off than me." That's one thing we find from a lot of people that are ex-military. Specifically from my background, obviously I know more about the Air Force side, but I'm sure it's across all services. And it's just that sense of, I'm all right, I'm sure there's somebody else. And combine all that together, there's that sense of, and it's not being, it's interesting because somebody commented about being belligerent or obstinate or whatever. It's just not, it's just that I'm sure there's somebody else that needs it more than I do.
Yeah.
And, the biggest challenge we have for the RAF Association, never mind about other charities, is finding anybody who's ex-military, specifically for us, obviously Air Force, that may need help because they won't come to ask for it. But there's a bit of me that, yes, by definition, I'm a veteran, and I don't have a problem with that per se. It's just that in my mind, when I think of a veteran, the first thing I see is a guy with a walking stick, with a blazer, blazing with stuff, and you'll talk to him all day because he'll be telling you stories about his daring do when he was flying the back of a Lancaster or bailed out of a Spitfire, or some of these stories you hear from the World War II. Obviously mine's predominantly Air Force type stuff. You're just in awe of these guys.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's actually a really interesting point because, as you say, I have done work with World War II veterans and specifically Bomber Command veterans as well, and there is certainly coming into, before we set up the podcast, it was definitely a term that I would have only really maybe identified with World War II, World War One, soldiers of a certain age, which, because I think maybe the association would be, if you're calling somebody a veteran, it makes it sound like they're of retirement age, and so it's older people. And it's not until maybe that, really getting deep into some of the episodes of the podcast that we've recorded, that there can be people off the back of, Afghanistan 10 years ago and left the army at 35, and, military
it would be, I would
veterans.
say the Second World War, they could have been in their teens, early 20s, did the 5 years of the Second World War, survived, left the military,
100%.
and they're still a veteran. I mean, I left at 38, it's very comparable with your, I left at 38, but there were people that join the Air Force and do 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it was, a short service commission, and leave, and they're still a veteran. It's not a problem. It's more in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
positioning it.
And I think that's probably quite a common mindset. We'll dive right into it. All both sides of your life, which have been incredibly full of stories. Let's start, as I always like to do, right back at the beginning, and talk to me sort of about growing up, obviously being born here, growing up in Malaysian times, and what was it like growing up in the Underwood household?
I wouldn't use the word privileged. It was a very comfortable lifestyle as an expat living in Malaysia. My dad worked for a company out there in Malaysia. My mum's family were in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So my memories of Malaysia was after school, playing football, in games, football clubs. My dad used to do a bit of coaching at the kindergarten school there, primary school in Malaysia we were at. Our garden had a reasonable sized garden. We used to have 2 sets of just not goalposts, not goals.
Yeah.
So they're just 2 posts. And my brother and I, Gary, our middle brother between myself and Tony, we used to be out there just playing 1-on-1 for like hours on end. And of course, you're in the tropics, so you're sweating. So that was my life in the Underwood household, but my mum was the eldest of 8. So I had 7 uncles and aunts, of which most of them, one was in Australia, one was in London. So there was 4 or 5 of my uncles and aunts were living there. Then I got cousins. I was the eldest of my generation. I'm the eldest because my mum was the eldest of 8. But as the cousins, we had lots of cousins. We used to go to our grandparents' house on a weekend or on a Sunday for a meal. So I remember, big massive family do's, big massive Chinese sort of food being laid up. I remember going to Bilal's, the curry place in KL, for lunch, for curry lunch every now and then. But some of my favourite memories are going to the hawker stalls and satay, and all the sort of Malay, Chinese, Indian foods, and all the hawker stalls just lined up on the side of the street, and just eating out, and at night outdoors, that sort of stuff. So, I've got very, very fond memories. My first memories are of the house in Ipoh, which is north of KL, and then latterly moved down to KL when Dad got posted down to KL, and then eventually got sent to Singapore. So we left the Southeast Asia about 77, 78, I don't remember the exact date, something like that. So by that stage I was 13, 14. But by the time I got to 7 or 8, school becomes a big thing. So that's why I ended up going to Barneycastle School, because my grandparents lived in Middlesbrough. So obviously it makes life easier if you put your school is very close to grandparents for exeats and weekends and half terms. And also for holidays, they would facilitate you getting, so I had to get the bus, myself and Gary to get the bus from Barneycastle to Darlington to Middlesbrough, down to North Ormsby, stay with our grandparents. The next day we'd go and get a taxi or a bus or wherever it was to Teesside Airport, fly down to Heathrow from Terminal 1 to Terminal 3, handed over to some stewardesses, because myself and Gary were YPs, young passengers, and then just chucked in the back of an aircraft and flown across to Malaysia.
What was that like then, coming over here for school when you being separated from your family at quite a young age?
Memories of it, I'm sure it wasn't quite this, but memories of it, we came across once, visited school, and virtually it felt like we put in the back of the class, and it was like, okay, you're at school now, bye, and parents went. That's sort of what it felt like. And obviously I can remember being in tears at that particular point, but for the rest of I did about, was it 2 or 3 terms we did. So we did a couple of terms before we then went to the prep school at Barneycastle, Gary and I. So we did a couple of terms this prep school. So there's a couple of the guys there that moved on to Barneycastle's preparatory school as well. We apart from that day, the rest of it, I have very fond memories of my time at school. Just doing kids stuff that you're doing, running around, playing TIG and lessons. And there's a chapel next door to the PNEU school that we used to go to. Then I went to prep school, a bit more sport involved. So we're playing sport, and there used to be this sort of grounds in the prep school. We used to play war, typical kids playing war, and all sorts of stuff. I settled in. I've got very fond memories of my time at boarding school, despite being a long way away. Sport obviously helped.
You mentioned being one of 3 and you being
4.
With your brother. One of 4.
4, got a sister.
So the 2 was your sister younger as well? Or?
Yeah, so it's myself. Gary was 18 months. Then Tony was another 4 years after that. So he's 6 years younger than me. And then Wendy was 18 months.
So the two of you and Gary were the first to come over, the 2 of you on your own. Did that forge a stronger relationship with you two compared to maybe your other 2 siblings?
To begin with, yes, because we did everything together. Literally, I was in upper 6 when Tony started first year. So that's the old first year.
Yes.
So year 7, 6. I've got kind of. So yes, during that time we were close. Gary, once he'd qualified as an accountant in the early 90s, I'd been in the Air Force for half my time. He then ended up going across to Asia, and he's been over in Asia for the last 35 years. So my contact with Gary has been a lot less. And of course my time with Tony's been a lot more, because we played rugby together at Leicester and with England.
So because that does well, people often would know you as the Underwood brothers for you and Tony together playing. So when did that relationship with him get stronger through sport? Was that the thing that maybe sort of brought you a bit closer together as with the age gap?
Yes, because my father died when I was 18, 19, just before I joined the Air Force. So I left, not long after my father died, joined the Air Force, so I left home, whereas Tony was still going through school for obvious reasons. So the first few years he was just a natural younger sibling, so he came to my graduation, then he came to my wing ceremony and that sort of stuff, but he was still from distant because obviously I'd left home. And it wasn't really till about 87 that he went to Leicester University, that he then came and played rugby for Tigers, and from then that was when we probably got to know each other. I mean, it's not we didn't know each other before, but it
the
grew.
Relationship grew, obviously. Just touching on that, what was your relationship like with your dad then? Obviously you were away for school and stuff, but was that still a close relationship?
I reflect on that a lot. It wasn't. I wouldn't have said it was close, because if I reflect on the 18 years, the very first start of it when I was in Malaysia, it was very close. I remember him doing football coaching. He was there all the time. We used to go butterfly catching on the weekends up into the jungles in the hills, and we'd go and do a picnic and that sort of stuff. We used to go to the coast as a family. He used to get the company station wagon, lay down on a mattress in the back, and then there's 4 kids. We just lie around the back, on our trips. Wouldn't be allowed nowadays, obviously, but driving off to the coast, 2-hour drive to go and have a week's holiday over there. So I remember that. But then when we flew back to then boarding school, obviously started about 7 or 8, and then we were obviously at a distance, so it would be school time was away from the parents, and then just had holiday time, and then when we flew back, we actually had about a year or two while he was still working out there before he came back. So by that time, obviously it wasn't as much. In the last few years before he passed away, he was in the UK running a small little business, so I got to know him better there, but I was still at school. And so, I look back and it was circumstance rather than a lack of love, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. How did that affect you at the time? You were only 18, but with significantly younger siblings, obviously making Tony then only 14 at the time, and your sister even younger. How did that affect you, and did that change your role with your siblings in any way, almost becoming then the eldest man in the family?
Not really, because not long after that, about a year later, I joined the Air Force. So not long after losing your father, settling down, I was in the process of trying to get into the Air Force. My mum had a lot of help from the Masonic lodge that my dad was a member of, so that she had a lot of help from that, and both of them were at school and they're quite young, so it wasn't so much the need to have a patriarch of the family per se. Myself and Gary left within, I was still trying to get the Air Force, and not long after I joined the Air Force, he just went off university. He came down to Nottingham, so the 2 elder siblings left, so my mum was looking after the 2 younger siblings as they went through school. It was obviously a little bit easier than looking after 4 kids at home. And they were looked after, and Tony was at Barney, and then Wendy went to various schools and various things, which again helped by the Masonic Lodge. It's one of those times. It's the biggest. The regret is the wrong word. The biggest shame, because my dad was massive into sport. He was a big, into sport. He was big football, and he spent, from the time I was 16 when I started playing at Middlesbrough, started doing representative games for Durham County schoolboys and various things. We used to jump in our Morris Traveller, and we used to drive around to all the, we used to, as a family, used to come and watch me playing in the early days. And then when I started playing for Middlesbrough, obviously I didn't have a licence for the first year or 2, so he used to drive me to training. So he'd drive to the club, sit in the bar, have a pint and smoked his pipe, waited for me to finish training, and drove me home. So he was very massively involved, and the biggest shame is that, he saw me, on the Saturday he saw me play for England Colts. So I got my England Colts cap on a Saturday at Portsmouth, and the family were there. So he saw me play, represent my country. and he died on the Sunday night.
Wow. Was it sudden?
Yes. Yeah, it was a massive heart attack, and he'd had health issues, but it wasn't expected. And was it April? I think it's like April '82, and then February '84. So just under 2 years later, I got my first cap for England. So he would have loved it.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah, of course, and we'll get into that stuff and talk more about the pathways of rugby and the Air Force. But was there any military sort of background in your childhood, in your family, that made the Air Force sort of appeal to you particularly,
No.
or where did that come from?
No, none at all. I mean, there was military connection. My grandfather, my mum's father, he was in the Malaysian army. And so when I remember as a young kid, he used to be in his uniform. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. But I don't remember much about it apart from uniform, and had no other understanding of that. I was too young. My father wasn't. He was in the Merchant Navy. He trained as an engineer in the Teesside docks, and he toured the world for 5 years as a engineering officer in the Merchant Navy. My uncle, however, my dad's side, he was in the national service, and he did 2 years as an Air Force. But I don't remember that. Obviously, it was before my time. But I don't remember anything like that. So there was, but it wasn't.
What stood out to you then as the biggest draw to it? Was it excitement?
Nothing to do with the military per se. It was all to do with flying.
Yeah, was it the excitement of being in? Was it a pilot that was the interest more than anything else?
Well,
and the flying jets.
So, travelling backwards and forwards from the UK back to Malaysia, this is a story I tell all the time when I talk about how I ended up going into flying. You end up looking around this little small window outside, and you see this terminal building and either plantations or palm trees and or whatever going past. And it piqued my interest. What does it look like out the front? You know, the runway looks really big when you're on the ground, but when you're in the sky, is it that big? What you're aiming for? When you take off, what does it look like? And that sparked my interest in flying.
It was curiosity.
It was absolutely curiosity, and so I used to. So when I was 13, 14, I used to write. I remember being in Singapore and I used to write off to all the airlines, asking for information about the airlines. To send me all the marketing documents, and stuff like that, knowing what aircraft they were flying and that sort of stuff. So I had real interest, and so my initial interest was going into commercial flying because that was the main bit I knew. Didn't really know anything about the military. And so when it came to the right age, I think it was 15. Was it 15 or 14? We had a CCF at school, and we had the Army and the RAF. And so with my interest in flying, it made sense for me to join the RAF bit. And of course, when I joined the RAF cadets, we went on camps every summer for a week to each various stations, and then we used to go and do AEF flying and various things. And obviously, the training we were doing at the cadet things on a Wednesday afternoon, it sparked that interest from a Air Force perspective. And basically, from thinking I was going to be a commercial pilot, it sort of flip-flop between that and wanting to join the military.
So both sports and the military are both, they're very disciplined, routine and structure is massive. And as somebody who excelled in both fields, was that discipline sort of something, that routine, something that had always been present growing up that made it quite easy for you?
To a certain extent, my parents weren't laissez-faire or anything like that, and they were relatively strict. I can honestly say that I think probably when I reflect back that some of that, especially from playing sport and various things, that sense of discipline, that's been ingrained in me now. I could quite happily be lazy and do nothing, and some of that ingraining has probably been good for me. Otherwise, I could have been, whatever. And it seems strange, incongruous that you sort of think, I'm nicely lazy, but I do enjoy just doing nothing. But I love my sport, and actually to be at that level and to do it at the same time as being a RAF pilot.
Yeah.
There's got to be something about you that wants to keep doing that, because I've had plenty of successes and great times, and I've did lots of flying and did lots of rugby games and whatever. But I've also you've had your ups and downs and travails as you go along, and it's how you bounce back from that, which is just fundamentally important. So it's one of those things that when you're doing it at the time, you don't think about it. You just do it. I like playing rugby, so I will drive to training. I do like flying, so I'll do that because I want to fly. I don't want to fail my flying course. So there's that sort of constant desire to want to, put the hours in. Did I do as much as I could have done, should have done? Probably not. When I reflect, as anybody does do, I reflect back now, look back, and go, you could probably done it smarter, if not better. But when you're living that life as it is, you're living the time, the moment.
It's really unique. And we spoke before we started recording about the generational difference and the age difference from my upbringing of seeing sport, the main sports that are on TV as a purely professional basis. And it's a really interesting story where differentiating between the RAF and the rugby careers is impossible because they overlap at the same time and they coincide together. So I want to try and disseminate in the best way and start on the RAF in those early years. Talk me through joining the RAF and what that looked like for you from when you went in 20 and those early years once you joined.
Well, there's sort of a preamble to before even joining at 20. So I joined the RAF cadets, and once you join cadets, especially with it being a private school, one of the things that schools tend to have, if comprehensive schools had CCF and ATCs or whatever, they'd have the same thing. We had a retired wing commander who was a liaison officer, who was an RAF liaison officer, and he would go around and he was part of the whole context of how we, as the Air Force, recruit. Just like anything else, you're just trying to get knowledge of the Air Force out there, try and get people hooked in the nicest possible way early on to be aware of what's going on. So once I get in there, I was keen to fly. He would have a chat with each of the different cadets to try and identify those that were really keen and help them in what they needed to do to go and join the military. So very early on, I think I was 16, I got sent to what they call a test in advance. So they sent you to do, it's a two and a half day, so they sent me down to Biggin Hill, which is down in Kent, and you literally did a medical, interviews and some basic aptitude tests, and from that they gave you a don't bother coming back again, or you passed sort of thing. So it's like why they call it testing in advance. So it's giving you a chance that yes, you have the ability to potentially be able to go on and do the full blown selection. He also suggested, do you want to be a pilot? Well, would you like to get a flying scholarship? So I applied for a flying scholarship. I had to go and do the same thing again, and I got awarded a flying scholarship, which meant that I went to Cambridge, and I did 4 weeks down in Cambridge. I can't remember, I think they paid for B&B lodgings near Cambridge Airport. We used to walk from our BB down to the airfield at Cambridge, run by Marshals, and to the flying club there. And I was given 30 hours worth of tuition, and my dad paid for the final 5 hours to get my PPL. So at the age of 16, I got a PPL, which is a year earlier than you can get your driving licence.
Yeah.
And so I got that, and then everything was building up then towards applying. So my last year at school, I was doing A-levels. I then went and applied for the Air Force, went down to Biggin Hill today, and it's a 5-day selection thing, virtually. And you'd go through medical again, massive bout of aptitude tests and coordination tests and all various things, and interviews. And if you get through that, literally roughly halfway through the day, they sort of call out names. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, if you want to come forward to the desk, you can pick up your travel vouchers and you can get the train back. And you're off. I mean, it's fairly sort of cutthroat. The rest of you report back here at 8 o'clock in the morning, or whatever. And so the final bit of the selection was then more practical leadership tasks and group discussions. So put into syndicates. There's 5 of us in the so they because they've done all the stuff beforehand, they put us into syndicates based on certain criteria about not putting the same alpha males in them and all that stuff, just mixtures and stuff. And so we'd have a room to be like this. There'd be 2 people on one side of the table. There'd be 5 of us here, A, B, C, D, E, and they just ask a question. So do you think we should actually invade? So go and help Ukraine and fight Russia? Discuss. And so they're just trying to see what sort of conversations
Yeah.
you had and how you, and what they do is they tend to put the sort of most sort of extroverts on the outside to sort of spark conversations across the sort of slightly quiet ones. So they're trying to observe you in seeing how you interact in a group environment with other people about subjects you either know or you don't know about, or that you're able to offer thoughts and ideas and whatever. So it's really interesting from that perspective.
Where did you fit into that dynamic?
I'm in the middle because I'm more of an introvert than I'm an extrovert. And then they did the practical tests where they took us to the big hangar and they got all these fixed sort of tests with barrels, ropes, and sort of things I'm sure you've seen, whatever. And you go, right, and each of you has you take 2 or 3 goes at being leader, and you go, right, your task is to get all your team from that level over that. You can't touch anything that's blue. You can only touch things that's white. If you do, your player gets killed off or whatever. You've got to get everybody across safely, and safety rules, etc. Blah blah blah. And some of the exercises are designed that some of them you can't. They're designed that you can't pass it in the time that's allocated. What they're looking at for you is how you lead, how you communicate, how you drive that thing, and how you cope when you put under pressure. And so when you get to the end of that, then it's like, thank you, off you go, and then you get a letter in those days, obviously. And I didn't get through the first time, and they said, thank you very much, you did really well, but we just feel you're not quite mature enough, so please come back next year. So I went, okay. And that was it. I just said, right, I'll come back next year.
Yeah.
So I literally, as I finished school, I did some retakes of my A-levels because I need to get my quals up and stuff like that. Because I scraped through my O-levels, GCSE equivalent.
Yeah.
So I had to do some retakes. So eventually I scraped through with 5 grade C O-levels. And I failed both my A-levels. I did do retakes, but I just passed them. I did an O-pass, so I didn't get even an E grade A-levels. And I took a year where I started playing a lot more rugby, started getting representative games. I started playing for England Colts, as I said to you, and then I got picked to play for England under 23s, and I got picked to play for England B and that sort of stuff in that time. And obviously I was on the dole because I was waiting to go in the Air Force, and they sort of said, you need to get a job. So I applied and got this, it was YOP scheme in those days. There's various names for them. YOP scheme, Youth Opportunity Programs. They were designed to do a 6-month thing with a company, and if you did well enough, they'd take you up. Be like a sort of abbreviated apprenticeship type thing. YTS was the next one, iterative of that youth training scheme. And I knew how to do something, so I went and did one. I was a pewter smith's lad. So literally, there's just Tom Neal. He was an artist, and he worked in pewter. And he made tankards and dishes and trays and candlesticks and candelabras and all sorts of stuff. And I was just that helper because he had another guy who'd been there for quite a while who's like sort of understudy. And I was just 3 of us just working in his workshop. And I learned how to make pewter trays and tankards and all sorts of stuff. It's fascinating. Something I've always thought when I get to retiring and you can, because pewter's got quite a low melting point. It's quite an easy metal to use. So you don't need a big massive furnace, you just need a stove. So actually it's quite an easy metal to use, and yet you can make some interesting stuff out of it. So anyway, so I did that for 6 months, really enjoyed it, and reapplied, and so I reapplied, and I always remember I got a phone call so I went in the summer, I reapplied, and I got a phone call sort of October, November time, something like that. I was at home, basically saying, congratulations, you've been successful, and let's just want to talk to you about when you want to start. And this is completely not the way they would normally do it. So normally you get a letter saying you've been successful, here's a date for you to start at Cranwell. But they rang me up and said, congratulations, you've been successful. When would you like to start? Because obviously we're aware that you're playing rugby. I was like, oh yeah, okay. So I've got so I was in the county championships playing for Yorkshire. We were qualified for the Yorkshire Championship final at the end of January. So I said, our final game's the 31st of January. So if anything after that? I said, yeah, we've got one on the 14th of February. Done. So I started the Air Force on the 14th of February on a Monday in 1983. And to give you some sort of idea, you can tell from that phone call that the Air Force were obviously aware now that I was a reasonable rugby player.
Yeah.
So they'd obviously spotted that. So I arrived on Sunday afternoon, came down by train, cheap suit, training up kit, loads of other 19, 20, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds arriving at a meet and greet. There was about 120 of us starting on that course or something like that, and sort of everybody sort of nervously looking around, wondering what's going on, a bit apprehensive and that sort of stuff. Then parents then went and we all got put into our billets, slept the night, and the next morning, in your suit, you're wandering around, you attest to Her Majesty, and then you go around and get all your kit, so your camouflage clothing, helmets, respirators, boots, socks, and you had to do all the sort of bureaucratic administrative stuff, get all your kit, and about sometime after the afternoon, I was called into the wing commander's office. It's like, what have I done? It's only day one. And he basically said, right, Underwood, tomorrow at 4:00 you are to report to your billet front door with 2 days worth of clothes and all your rugby training kit. Okay, sir. A Flat and Lacey will pick you up. Okay. So it's 4:00 on Tuesday. I was at my front door with my bag of clothes and my rugby kit. What's the first name? Flat and Lacey was a mod policeman. He picked me up, drove me to Bottisford, which is on the A52. So from there, he drove me to Bottisford, dropped me off at Nigel Gillingham's house. He was the captain of the RAF rugby team. I stayed a night in his house that Tuesday night. Cracker Sparrows, 6:00 in the morning. I can't remember what time it was. We left Nottingham Station to get a train. Got a train all the way down to Plymouth.
Wow.
Got out of Plymouth after lunchtime, whatever it was, long train journey down 5 hours, where it was. Got picked up, taken to this training thing, met the Air Force rugby team, and that night I played for the Air Force against Plymouth Albion. Stayed the night in Plymouth, got on the train the next day, taken back to Nottingham, got back to, I can't even remember where I got picked up by Flat and Lacey again or somebody else, but somebody picked me up and drove me back to Cranwell. Got dropped off outside my billet accommodation to walk into my flight, where they're being taught by the flight sergeant how to do ironing, because one of the things you're taught how to iron your uniform, make sure there's creases and that stuff in it, and your shirts. So yeah, my first week in the Air Force, obviously training, but I missed 2 days of my first week in the Air Force. So the Air Force were very aware I was playing rugby.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on a couple of things off that. Firstly was, do you think then really in hindsight that not getting through the first time, a bit of a blessing in disguise in the way that it allowed you maybe to prioritise the rugby a little bit more and allow that to progress?
Yeah, what ifs, could be's, don't know. The thing what you remember is my mindset. I was just having fun playing rugby. Rugby was just a hobby that I was doing. So my whole focus was in the Air Force.
Yeah.
So when I didn't get in first time, it was like disappointment, but okay, I'll go next year.
Yeah.
There was no other get another job, do this, get other qualifications, nothing. It was all
plan A.
It was plan A.
Yeah.
100%.
So to kind of hold the timeline for a moment, just to acknowledge the rugby up until this point. When did you first really start getting involved playing rugby?
I didn't start playing rugby till first year at main school, Barney Castle. So I literally moved from prep school up to 11. Yeah. I know some prep schools go to 13, but we moved at 11. So moved at the main school, and autumn term, winter, autumn term, whichever one do it. First Wednesday afternoon, sports day, sports. So it'd be the winter. So what was it? I think until clocks went.
Yeah.
It would be lessons, and so we did 4 classes in the morning, lunch, 3 classes which finished around 2:30ish. Then it was sports. So it was right into MS3, so main school, classroom 3, and John Moore, who was our rugby teacher, basically drew a pitch out and explained rugby and what rugby was and gave us a questionnaire, and that was my first introduction to rugby. Now, we used to walk from at the prep school all the way through the main school to walk up to the tuck shop. It used to be at the far end of the playing field. So I used to remember on a Saturday morning we were allowed to go and spend 10p on whatever, buying sweets or whatever. And so you used to pass either cricket or rugby on the main playing fields, because you walk around the back of the school, which is backs onto the playing fields. So I remember sort of seeing sport, but I had no idea what it was. No idea. And then obviously you learn about rugby, and we played I think my first game was an under-12s game against a Durham school, their preparatory school, and we just had a first game against them on one of the small pitches up on the playing fields. It was terrible. So we didn't play until at the end of the term because we had to learn how to play the game. 11-year-olds, most of us never played before. Running around like it's a honeypot. So we had a game. It was. I think we won like 6-3 or something. It was real. It wasn't exactly the most exciting game, but that was my first game. And then under 13s, and then we started playing more games. And then we had 2, 3 or 4 games because you build it up. Yeah. And so that's as simple as that. I mean, I've always been very quick. I used to do very well at sports day at school. My mum was an athlete actually when she was younger, and so I've always been quick. Never been stock. I'm obviously a bit more stockier now, but when I was a kid, if you see pictures of me, I used to be in the school swim team. I was quite a skinny kid, but very quick. And so I did it. I used to play on the wing for the football. So when I sort of moved to the rugby, it was an element of, okay, I'll play wing.
Yeah.
Because I was relatively quick. I wasn't a brilliant tackler, but I could catch and run a ball. And that's how it started.
And so the skills therefore came quite naturally. You picked it up quite quickly.
Relatively. I mean, from a catching and running perspective, yes. Obviously, like most people who play rugby, the psychological, physical aspect of it is something. The sooner you can get through that, the greater you'll enjoy the game.
How did you find?
It took me a long time to get my head around it. Technically, we weren't really taught how to tackle. In those days, it was limited coaching in those days. So, learning how to tackle a big forward running at you was relatively just, stand in the way, close your eyes and, hope the best. So I can remember one, his name was Raoul, I think. I remember. He was one of our big forwards, and he came running towards me, and I got a chin in my, got a knee in my chin, so I sort of cut the inside of my lip, because I had no idea. It's just like just like that, and it was about. I was around about 15-ish, 16, when I sort of got my head around it and understood the tackling side of it, and got my head around it in how. I wasn't a perfect tackler straight away, but I got my head around the fact that the more positive you are, the better you are at being proactive about the tackle. Actually, that stops you from being hurt. Mm-hmm. Actually, the more timid and the more sort of whatever you are, the more likely getting hurt. Yeah. So that's about 15, 16 before I sort of started getting the other side of my game, the running around and stuff. I had all the time. It was that side of that I got better at. But when you're somebody who's still, I was quick, but I was still very, very relatively small and tiny. So a lot of my defence was based on, I'll let you run around me and then I'll just tackle you. So, I wasn't the most physical of defenders, but it was that sort of time that it developed. And so from 16, 17, 18 was when things started really ramping up.
And so what did that look like for you? Because obviously, as you mentioned before, the nature of it not being professional at the time and just being viewed, you certainly viewed it as a hobby. What was ramping up looking like for you to, like you say, to then bring us to the timeline of playing that first game for the RAF?
No, that wasn't a long one because basically I started playing for. I missed most of my lower 6th year because I pulled my hamstring at sports day. And it took me a while to recover from that. So I missed the first sort of half the games in my lower 6, and then came through the last few games. By that stage, I'd been picked to play for Middlesbrough. So at 16, officially it was that half term. So I started playing, and then I got picked up in 79, was it? I think about that. So I got picked up to play by Middlesbrough, and so I went to play for their first team. So that was a real introduction to senior rugby, never mind. So I was 16 when I played for my first senior game for a senior club, albeit a junior club, if you know what I mean. It's not Premiership rugby or whatever. And so that started getting me a little bit more noticed, obviously, around the bazaars. But it was then when I was playing for Barney in my last year at school where I started. So by the end of lower 6, I was picked up. I was on the bench for Durham Schoolboys under 18s. I got a couple of bench places, and in those days, subs were only used if there was injuries, not tactical. So I don't think I played. But in the following year, I mean, I played something like 12 games for the school. I scored 42 tries, something like that in my upper sixth year. Bear in mind, Rob Andrew was in the same school team as myself. And so we had a really good team that year. And I got picked up then to play, because the schoolboys tend to play in the spring term. So I picked up to play for Durham Schoolboys. So I played for Durham Schoolboys against, it was the Northern Division, so I played against Northumberland, Cumbria, Yorkshire, Cheshire, Lancashire. I got picked to play in the North of England schools trials and didn't get picked for the North of England school team. But I got a trial for the North of England. It was like, wow, you know. And by this stage as well, I was picked to play for, because that was the schoolboys. Then I left school, I then got picked to play for England Colts. So that, when I told you about my father. So I played for England Colts. When I went down to play against Wales, I got given a letter saying that I'd been selected to play for the England under-23s team against England students a few weeks later. Bloody hell. I mean, you know, I was just playing for Colts and now I've been picked to play under-23s. So I played in that game, and then just after that game I got an invitation to go on tour with the England under-23s to Italy that year. I'll give you an idea what the difference between professional rugby and amateur. So England under-23s toured Italy that June, and we played Italy under-23s Tuesday night, we played Italy B Thursday night, and we played against the full Italian side on the Saturday afternoon. And of the touring party, I think it was 24 of us, 7 of us played in all 3 games.
Wow.
I mean, we wouldn't be allowed to do that now. No. And we won the first 2 when we lost just to Italy in the last game. But, you know, that under-23s, there was myself, Mike Teague, Stuart Barnes, Simon Halliday, there was a handful of others, Brian Moore. So all of those, they ended up being in the team with me during the late 80s and early 90s when we had the success that we had onto. So, you know, they identified some really good players. That was 82, and then obviously after that was when I applied and I got in that later that year. And I was playing, by the stage I was playing for Yorkshire. I think I played 1 game for the North of England against Fiji in 82 that summer. So, you know, from the rugby, that was ramping up. So in the year or so from applying to whatever, obviously that was being spotted and noticed by the Air Force.
When the Air Force was ultimately always Plan A and only ever Plan A, was there ever a thought process, or was it strange to look back now and think you could end up ultimately going on to becoming one of England's best ever?
Oh God, no, none whatsoever. No, I mean, you know, it's as you say. The way I describe it to people now who sort of can't get their head around it, you know, my job was flying, being in the Air Force, and my hobby was playing rugby. That's the best way to describe it. So everything was always going to prioritise that way. So rugby didn't prioritise my life as such. It was before I joined the Air Force, because that was a big thing that was going on, but it was still focusing towards the Air Force. As soon as I joined the Air Force, then that became 100% the priority.
Yeah.
But obviously, because of the level I played at, it ended up that it was only just ahead of the rugby priority as well, for obvious reasons. But you know, when I started playing, I was under no illusions at the time that if I ended up going all the way through the training system and I ended up going flying fast jets, I was half prepared for my career to be curtailed in rugby. Because you obviously,
presumably with the RAF priorities, you were happy for that to be the case?
Yeah. Because once I go and start flying, you know, the really, you know, pointy jets at the very end of flying Tornadoes or whatever it was, you know, the amount of time commitment you need to do and put into that, trying to drive from there to go to training on a regular basis would be quite a challenge.
How accommodating then were the Air Force with the rugby then? It obviously seemed to vary at the start.
Yeah.
But did that carry through the whole way?
Yeah.
Was there allowances made, especially further down the line with England stuff, and how did that pan out?
100%. The Air Force were brilliant. I had 2 Air Force members who were on the RFU committee, so that obviously helps. And my understanding, very simply, I mean, this is not stuff I didn't know at the time, but subsequently, every single station and every single squadron commander that I was going to be at, from training and then on squadrons, they all knew that I was arriving. And they didn't say make a special case, they just said make life easy for him.
How did that feel for you? Was there an element of that, or maybe even the other guys that you were working with and that would maybe see not preferential treatment, as you say, but maybe any sort of different extra protection or such? Did that make it difficult for you or change anything?
No, the ones that I worked with definitely did not have that view. The ones that I didn't work with, there were examples of people thought that I had special preferential treatment. Understandably, because of perception, they think, a lot of people would think that I basically took February and March off, didn't work at all because I was playing in the Five Nations. The opposite is true. I was flying Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then travelling down, training Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but then coming back Sunday, flying back on Monday.
Yeah.
So there was that perception that people had from outside the squadron. Those in the squadron, I was like anybody else. I was a, two-ship lead. I was an authorizer. I was a programmer. I was doing all the sort of roles that are expected of me at the time, but at the same time, playing rugby.
Do you think that helped maybe sort of your focus on both sides, because you had to be very switched on, you had to be very alert and very aware of everything that was going on in your professional life away from the rugby, but kind of maybe that it helped in tandem?
It's a question I get asked a lot, and if you think about it, it goes back to the question you asked me when we were first initially sort of setting up around, it seems three different disparate things. There's three different parts of my life. Well, you could argue for my family, but wife and kids, but Air Force, rugby, and now business. So very much a tripartite life, and then my family's life outside of that. Anything in life that you do and you learn something of will always benefit you somewhere else. There's very few things that really you learn and it's only beneficial just for that and nothing else. You will learn something. Even the process of learning something can add something to you about how you learn something else somewhere else anyway. So some things are more relevant in helping you, some are more so. And it's just as life. The biggest things that I learned were, the biggest thing I learned was comms, because I got married within 3-4 years of joining the Air Force, and then with rugby, so having a wife and then young kids and then me running around in the Air Force and running around tour, tell the family, the boss, as soon as you can when you think you're going to be away or doing whatever.
Yeah.
Because you're just delaying. The more you delay it, the worse it'll get, as far as they're concerned. So tell bad news early has been one. And also, just generally, in the early couple of years, there was a bit of pulling pillar to post, because people, it'd be unfair to say want their pound of flesh, but there were people who wanted me to go and play here, there, or whatever. And I very quickly learned about how to communicate with both sides to make sure. So the Air Force, I can't speak highly of what the Air Force did. All the squadron commanders I had, all the flight commanders I had, basically, I just told them when I was going to be away playing either for the Air Force or on tour, and I said, put it on the calendar. And then we won't plan you that, but everything around that, you'll go and do the flying. So it was not as if I didn't do the stuff that all the other squadron members do. And a lot of other people did a lot of their activities. You could do on expeditions, you could go on windsurfing courses and that sort of stuff. I did rugby, but I still did my share of work, and I was never always the work person with the least number of flying hours.
Yeah. When
I came back, I still had responsibilities, with running the squadron, the programming, planning, and all that sort of stuff. So I was very conscious. I always made sure I pulled my weight.
Let's then focus on the RAF years first, and then we can go back and I say years, that section of those years first. What was what were the jobs that you were doing, and what did that career look like?
Well, the first thing when I joined the Air Force was I went through officer training. I said to you, I graduated on the 15th of June 1983, posted to RAF Cranwell to do flying training. So the next 3-4 years was just going through flying training. So I had to do basic flying training at Cranwell. So I did about 150 hours flying the Jet Provost, which is basically, it's teaching you how to fly. It's like driving, it's like, I know it's the same but different for driving a car, but fundamentally it was your flying driving course. Depending on how you got to the end of that, you were then streamed either fast jet, multi-engines or helicopters. So streamed fast jet, tick, very happy, sent us to Valley. So now we go to Valley. The Jet Provost used to fly around at low level at 300 knots at 500 feet. That was all we cleared down to. 500 feet is still low, but that's what we do, and we did various things and we'd drive. So it's that sort of speed. We go to Valley, and now we're doing applied type flying. So we're now flying in a Hawk. Most people know the Red Arrows, so it's the same aircraft, no different. The Hawks at Valley were all Raspberry Ripple we called it, because they're all red with white splashes all over it. And so now we're flying an aircraft that flies at 420 knots. So it's much faster getting around, much more, bit more fast jetty like. So now we're flying that, doing things much faster, and flying around at low level at 420 knots. So now you've gone from flying at 5 miles a minute at low level to doing 7 miles a minute at low level. So you get to the end of that course and you get your flying wings. So that's a big thing for us as pilots. So you get your brevet, wings brevet, and there's a ceremony at the end of it. So I again, this is where the Air Force helped. So the Air Force, that I started that in April and was supposed to finish in September, October time. And they said to me, right, we want to send you on the course to get you finished before the Five Nations starts in February 86. So we're going to send you down to Chibnall early. So they sped me up through the Valley course. I finished my flying early so that they could send me down to, so I passed it, and they sent me down to Chibnall. And I turned up at Chibnall without my wings because I hadn't had the wing ceremony yet. And I got such a flack thrown at me. He says, well, you get those wings sewn on there. Doesn't make any difference. And so I started early, and then I had to go back up to Valley to go and do my wings ceremony, family stuff, and then came back down again. And I did that sort of like September, October, November, December, finished early December. They wanted me to finish early January, sorry, because I was going to start the Tornado course. Well, that's what I ended up doing. So they wanted to get me finished in time to go and do the OCU. So at Chibnall, at Barnstaple, we now flew the Hawk again, but it was now camouflaged Hawk. And we were now, as opposed to learning how to fly an applied way, more aggressively and that tactically, it's now war tactical now. So very quickly, once we started flying, we were then cleared down to 250 feet. So we're now flying at 420 knots down at 250 feet, so 80 meters off the ground, 7 miles a minute. And we're now doing air-to-air gunnery, doing air-to-ground gunnery. We're practicing bombing targets. We're now doing air-to-air combat, and we're now doing missions and flying 2 ships and flying missions into Wales and mainly Wales, practicing bombing targets and then practicing having people trying to shoot you down and fly around, that sort of stuff. So you're learning how to fight, basically. And at the end of that, you're then rolled. So I got picked to go to the Tornado. So in the Tornado, I started in April of 86. And unfortunately, I got 14 hours into it, had to do a few extra trips, and I failed the course. And so that was a real pivotal moment. It was at Cottesmore where I met my wife. She was an air traffic controller there. And there was some umming and ahhing as to what I was going to do, and it wasn't until there was a few months of hanging around waiting to see what was going on, and then eventually they posted me to so I started in August, so about a month or 6 weeks something. I had to sit around, and they eventually posted me to Canberras. So that's when I started at RAF Whitton on Canberras on 360 Squadron in October, November 1986. And that's when I set. So that the first bit was all training, and then so I failed the fast jet on Tornado, and I went to Canberra's, which is like a pseudo fast jet aircraft. And then the rest of that, my career was then flying on squadrons.
What is that feeling like of flying at that speed, being in full control of the aircraft?
When you first go flying, and you fly low, it's exhilarating, and I wouldn't say it's frightening. It wasn't frightening for me, but it was it focused the mind, shall we say?
Yeah.
You know, bad enough doing it when it's reasonably flat around here in Lincolnshire, but then when you go through the hills, but it's extremely exhilarating, and it's like anything else. It's not as if you suddenly go, right, okay, thank you, Mr. Underwood. You're now Flight Underwood, and you're going to go and jump in his aircraft and fly around at 420 knots at 250 feet. You know, it took me 3-4 years of training to get to flight. Now, saying that, you know, if I look 150 hours, and then we did about 80 hours at Valley, so that's now 230, and then we did another 50, 60 hours at about 300 hours. So 300 hours, I'm now at the end of this course, and I'm now, my last sortie at Chivenant, of that generation for us, that passed the course, our last sortie was, the instructor would come in and say, here's 2 targets, you're briefing at such a time, and this is your time and target on one of the targets. So I led it, he was my instructor, he was the wingman. We then planned the route, but he acted as my wingman, even though he was much more experienced than I. So I said, go and do this, go and do that, write my domestics up, do my slides, right, this is the target, and then can you do up the IP to target runs. So we ended up with a low-flying map, and then some ordnance survey maps, which is the target run, so a bit more detail. We had to get airborne on time. We flew up to Pembrey in sort of the South Welsh coast to drop a first run attack. So we dropped a bomb, turned right, up into Wales, past the Connethley Maths, into Wales, and we had to go and hit 2 targets. Once we were in there, there was a fighter, another Hawk, we'd given our route to, knew our timings, and he would then come and try and shoot us down. And every time he did, we had to try and evade him. So I had to make sure I had to get back on time because I had a timing target to hit. So I'm 22. Was it 22? 80. Yeah, January 86. So 22. I was 23 in June. So 22, in charge of an aircraft, in charge of a 2-ship, trying to stop being shot down by another fighter. And all I had was a map, a speedo, a compass, and a stopwatch at 250 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
So, you know, you talk about responsibility. The Air Force gives you a lot of responsibility. They train you massively, obviously, but they empower you and give you a lot of responsibility at a very early age.
You were saying, obviously, when we kicked off about the term veteran and not seeing any active duty, there were obviously periods in your service where there were active war zones going on where we were involved. Was there reasons why there wasn't postings? Was it luck, or was it fortune, or how did it pan out?
I wouldn't say luck. It was a circumstance that the aircraft I flew were not offensive aircraft. So the Canberra I flew was a support training role aircraft. So 360 was a Canberra. You know, used to be a B2 Canberra. Used to be an intermediate bomber from the nuclear age, and we used it for ECM training, so electronic countermeasures. So we used to fly around and we used to jam what was known as the UCAG, UK Air Defence Ground Environment. So all the missiles, all the radar sites, all the fighters, all that sort of stuff. We would just go and jam their radars and jam them, communications jamming them, to help train them to get through that environment. But, you know, we had no guns on the aircraft, no warning things on the aircraft, nothing, no chaffs, anything like that. So we were not designed to go into a war zone at all. Then I flew the Hawk on 100 Squadron between 92 and 96. So it's just after the Gulf War. And again, the Hawk is a training aircraft. Whilst it can carry bombs and guns, and if need be, it could be taken to war, but it's a basic fighter. So when I was flying there, I was busy flying around at low level, but flying around, training all the air defence guys how to try and shoot down. So I used to fly at low level as a singleton or pair, and the F3s and Phantoms in the old days, etc., used to try and come and shoot us down. So we would try and evade them. So I was training them a lot. And then finally my last aircraft was definitely not, it was a training aircraft. It was, again, painted red and yellow, white. I was training navigators and rear crew how to fly. So my last 3 years in the Air Force was flying that.
How do you reflect on your time in the Air Force?
My biggest disappointment was failing Tornadoes, not going to fast jets properly. You know, I was destined to go fly a Tornado, which I did do. Circumstances are, if I did go, I would have probably been in the Gulf War, because, you know, the colleagues of mine that were on the training course, they went. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I still had a great time. My 4.5 years on 100 Squadron was one of my best times. I learnt a lot. It shaped me as a person. It's a big part of me. A lot of who I am as a person and my outlook on life and values have been, you know, knocked into me by the Air Force, and, you know, being part of squadrons and working together, and a lot of what I'm doing in my current role in my, you know, my business now, a lot of what shaped me in the Air Force and my beliefs and ethos is shaping that in what I'm trying to provide for my solutions for businesses now. So, you know.
And we'll get on to now a little bit later on, but that's something that I think is really vital in terms of what we try to do with the podcast and what some of the messaging is from the podcast, and that is the fact that you're, on paper, the career that you do now would appear to people probably as quite vastly different from a career in the Air Force, but actually once you strip everything back to the principles and the values of it, it's quite similar, because you can kind of make all the values that you've learned through your time in the Air Force pretty applicable to whatever it is that you do. And that's something that I think is quite important in the messaging of what we try and talk about, in the way that the values that people pick up from the military can be utilised in everyday life no matter what you do. And has that been a big thing for you? You used to speak about it now, but from the age of 20 to now, those values have underpinned everything that you've done?
To a certain extent, yes. And it's like anything else, a huge part of the values that any of us go through the military will stand us in good stead. But applying them directly in the way we did in the military into civilian life cannot always work. And so half of what you've got to get your head around is understanding how to get the best of the bits we do. Because I mean, I don't go into any committee that says, right, this is the way we do in the Air Force, we're a high performance organisation, you should do it this way.
Absolutely.
It won't work.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, the military, we're designed to go to war. In effect, the military is a training organisation. We train, ready to go to war. When we go to war, we're still training. And at our best, we're at war. We're not at our best, shall I say, when we're at peacetime. Because everything is predicated around war, you know, everything's clear, we're trying to do this, everything's function. And then in peacetime, it's just sort of this sort of steady cadence, which is not really the way that we've been designed, you know, how to operate. And so I'm very aware of that. And, you know, whilst some people would look at me and say, oh yeah, I can tell that Rory's from the military, but there's a lot of people who will not realise I'm in the military. And so whilst you could say some of the values and ethos I've learned and got ingrained into me and I love and live by from my time, yeah, yes, I still try and live by them. But I would say that rugby has played a part in that as well.
Yeah.
You know, fundamentally, the bit that's connecting, as I said to you before, is that it's people. How do you get a group of people, whether it's a handful, 10, 20, 500, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, how do you get a group of people to work as effectively together to try and deliver something? That's it. So 15 people on the pitch playing rugby, 11 on playing football. How many you got in your business? 50, 300 people in a business? Or you got, in my time, it was when I first joined, like 90,000 in the Air Force. How do you get all those people to operate to be able to defend this country and defend its interests around the world, as so decreed by HMG? So a lot of those lessons are learned, and there's lots of things that